Hello, guys. Good day. Welcome to our lesson on Restoration Age. Before we dig in, let's take a look at the historical timeline of this period. So it started in 1600, 1660 to 1668, but these are just a glimpse of some of the important events that happened during this period. Okay, so our objective for this session is to trace the events during the restoration period and state the highlights on the literary movement during this period. The beginning in 1649, where Charles I was removed from the throne in England and sent into exile. Parliament Puritan ideals in charge with the appointment of Oliver Cromwell as the Lord Protectorate during that time. England moved into a period of rule by Parliament instead of being ruled by a king or a queen. All was well in England, and poets like John Donne marked the change from a warrior lifestyle to a court built on the ideals of the Puritan religion. When Oliver Cromwell when Oliver Cromwell died in 1659, his son Richard Cromwell declared himself Lord Protectorate, and that angered Parliament, who felt the new Commonwealth was no different than having the country run by a monarch or run by a king or a queen. So Parliament removed the Commonwealth from power and restored the monarchy to power by bringing King Charles' sons, Charles II, brought him to England to rule. Okay, restoring the monarch also restored freedom to authors. Okay, during the Cromwell years, censorship occurred in all forms of literature. With the removal of the censorship, authors rushed to print their saved materials for all to read. Charles sponsored studies into mathematics and philosophy. He also preferred a tolerant approach to those of other faiths and beliefs. Instead of persecution of the Puritans, he chose instead to keep them from public office, and that led to an increase of prose literature during this time that depicted dissent of political theory and economics. In terms of poetry, poetry moved from the common lyrical style to forms such as odes, pastoral poetry, and aerial verse. This move also coincided with the change of writing from personal experiences to a more public experience of psychology and philosophy. Right? Rhyming couplets in iambic pentameter was the most common form utilized during that time. Okay? Some of the restoration poetry or lyric poetry, which a form of poetry with rhyming schemes that expresses personal feelings, often sung in the king's court. Also odes, a lyric poem with complex forms of stanza, usually written about a person or an event. Pastoral verse, a poem that surrounds the peace and simplicity of the countryside. In aerial verse, a poem that centers around air, heaven, stars, and sky. So when it comes to prose during this period, okay, prose during this period saw the birth of two genres that would dominate the future of writing fiction in journalism. Although religious writing continued to be the mainstay, prose writers began to stray into the topics of political and social importance. In addition, with Charles II love of philosophy, writers began to explore this genre and use of satire, the use of satire, no, in which it become a popular literary convention at that time. So with Charles' death in 1685, his brother James II took the throne. James, however, was not well liked in the parliament and soon replaced him with Charles's daughter Mary and her husband William. Okay, so their taking off the throne was so peaceful and desirable. It was named the Glorious Revolution during that time. Okay? So the type of satire that were often written during the time were Horatian satire and Juvenalian satire. Horatian satire is a playfully amusing type of satire that seeks to correct a vice or foolishness with gentle laughter. And Juvenalian satire, this is a darker kind of satire that tackles um, bitter and criticizes corruption or incompetence with scorn and outrage, but all the rest are satire with and with the intention to make people laugh. Okay, so as I mentioned that after Charles' death, James II took over the throne, and soon after, because James II was not sought after by the parliament, he was replaced with Charles' daughter Mary and her husband William. So their they are taking the throne peacefully and desirably. So in fact, it was named the Glorious Revolution at that time. So in 1860, in 1689, William and Mary reaffirmed the Bill of Rights that allowed those who own property to rule through an elected parliament, though not the democracy type of England that we now see. Okay. So England now had the most representative government of the time period. So and when Mary and then William died, the country's new queen took the throne. Okay, her name was Queen Anne, and she was the daughter of James II. Upon her death, upon her death, she left no heir so the throne passed to her cousin George I. He was followed by his son George II, and as Germans, they were both highly unpopular with the English people. However, their heir George III was raised in Englishmen, and so he was more accepted by the English citizens. So the period of the 18th century is commonly known as the Age of Enlightenment or the Age of Reason. So major emphasis was put on reason, logic, harmony, and stability. The period also saw much growth in technology, from the invention of telescope by Isaac Newton in 1668 to the invention of cotton gin by Eli Whitney in 1793, and in literature by Dr. Samuel Johnson, who published the first dictionary of the English language in 1755. With the advent of the Industrial Revolution, changes in the average man's life also became common. During this time, the literacy rate of men increased to 50%. Coffee houses became the place for educated men to spend their evenings discussing literary and political issues. Okay? Fences around property also began to pop up in the countryside, and that also causing several deaths of village life. Okay? factories began to spring up and workers left rural life in order to take the new jobs created for them in the urban areas. With the decline in farming lifestyles, the impoverished masses began to grow due to the increase of food production and increase in prices. So just like the restoration, the Age of Reason also saw a change in the forms of literature, published letters, and diaries. Items always written for personal reasons began to become popular in literary circles. Now, the use of wit and satire also continued to grow in popularity, especially with the advent of revolutionary fervor uh, with the advent of revolutionary fervor, which began to sweep both Europe and fledgling American colonies. So from the Restoration Age, okay, to the Age of Reason, the world of literature began to evolve into form still common in our contemporary society nowadays. Political and societal issues took center stage while religious ideals in literature began to fade. Knowledge and understanding become focal points that led to the beginning of revolutions and industrialization that would usher in a new world order. So some literary pieces, guys, that we can see or we can read during these periods are Song to Celia by Ben Jonson, The Lucasta on Going to the Wars by Richard Lovelace, On His Blindness by John Milton, Paradise Lost by John Milton, Diary by Samuel Pepys or Pepys, an essay on dramatic poesy by John Dryden. So these are some of the literary pieces that I wish you would like you to read on. You may choose any of these. Perhaps you can work on Paradise Lost by John Milton and an essay on dramatic poesy by John Dryden. You can also read Song to Celia by Johnson. So whichever piece or whichever pieces of literature you wish to read on, I wanted to focus on the theme and how these and how the theme of each piece reflect the period to which they are to which to when they were written to. Okay, so that would be your homework. Okay, so that we can at least get a glimpse of some of the literatures that were written during the Restoration period, from the Restoration age to the Age of Reason in 1800s. So 1600s to the 1800s, or 16th century to 18th century. But of course, there is so much more that you can read about about this period, but what I have just given you was only a glimpse, of what this period all about, the highlights of this particular restoration age. So thank you so much, guys, for listening, and stay tuned for the next lesson. That's all for now, and bye bye.